Code Africa. Unlock the future.
Hello and welcome to Code Africa. Joseph is here. In this episode, we are going to build this stopwatch timer application. Alright, and this is the final version of the application that we are going to be building, and this is how it looks like. Okay, it has a nice landing page like this. Alright, you can see that it has a title which says stopwatch timer, and in the next section it also has what the millisecond, the second, and the hour. Okay, and it has a nice buttons here. This button is for reset, this is for pausing, this is for stopping, and this is for starting. And you also have a lab here that take records. Okay, all right, so the purpose of this timer is to help you take tracks of anything that you are doing, especially whenever you sit on your laptop doing any project. Make sure that you switch this timer on and take records of whatever you are doing. Okay, myself, I built this application to monitor everything that I do on my machine. Okay, anything new that I'm going to start, I put this timer on it. Even if I'm watching a movie, I put a timer on it. That's how it works. Okay, so you can start the time like this. As usual, it will read as it is going, and you can pause a time and you can stop it. When you stop it, it will save the time and it will save it. Whenever you save it, you give it a label. Okay, you label it for you to know, so you can start a project and you can use it to monitor the progress of anything that you are doing. Isn't it awesome for you to build your own timer and using it on your own machine? We are going to start from scratch. We are going to use the HTML to build a structure. Afterward, we use the CSS to do the decoration and the coloring and the responsiveness, and then we will use the JavaScript and add more functionalities and make it more interactive. Okay, so we are going to build this from scratch, and I'm going to hold your hand to be able to accomplish this project, nice project, as you are seeing on your screen, with ease. All right, so if you're ready as I am, let's dive in. Alright, so we are starting from scratch, so let's open our VS Code. Okay, let's close this one. Come here, let's open a folder, and we are going to create a new folder, and we are creating it on our desktop. Okay, I'll title my timer application, and let's open it. Okay, you can close this one. So this is our timer application. Now inside the timer application, let's create another folder for our project, and we call it stopwatch timer. Okay, let's hit enter. Now let's create our HTML file. If you click on this icon, so we call it index.html. We hit enter. Let's create our CSS file. Say style.css. Let's create our JS file, which is our JavaScript, so we call it script.js. Okay, so we have our HTML, our CSS, and our JavaScript. Now we are going to start from scratch, so we are going to start right from HTML. Alright, so let's start with the HTML. Okay, so I'll just hit on the exclamation sign and I just hit on enter, and I have all the structures created for me. Okay, so one may ask, how were you able to come by this? Okay, so if you don't know, please, I have configured my autocomplete. Okay, so if you like, you can do likewise. Okay, quick one, let me show you how I did mine. Okay, so I added some code. So come to settings, come here, hit on settings, and come to settings again. From here you come to CSS. You can see it's here, CSS under extension. Okay, it's under extension. We come to CSS peak. Okay, it's here. Click on that one, then you will see edit in setting.json. Okay, the JSON, click on that one. It will open the JSON file for you like this. So by default it's not like this. Okay, this code, I added this code myself. Okay, I added this code myself. That is why I am getting the autocomplete and it is working faster for me. So if you like, please, you can type this code in, or better still, I can leave it in the comment section for you. Okay, so that is that. Let's move on. It's just by the way. All right, so at this point, let's add some h1 tag and see if our code is working perfectly. Let's call it project test. Okay, so project test. Now save it. Okay, when you save it, please make sure you have live server installed. Okay, when you have live server installed, you can now show it. You can see, okay, so the live server is here, so you can open with live server and you can see project test is working. Now let's go ahead and test our CSS and also our JavaScript. Alright, so our HTML is working perfectly. So now let's link our CSS and our JavaScript. So let's link our CSS. So start.css. Then let's link the JavaScript. src, which is our other script. Alright, so now our CSS and our JavaScript has been linked successfully. So now let's get to code and get our hands dirty. Alright, so we are now beginning the project. So first thing first, let me change the document, the title here. So the title will be Stopwatch timer application. Let me take this one out. So let me show you the wireframe, how the project is going to be. So this is it. Okay, so we will create a whole container to contain all the elements. This white background here will be one container where we will put everything inside. And this is how it's going to be. Alright, so we will create an H1 to showcase our title, okay, which is the Stopwatch time. Then we will create a div to hold the millisecond, the second, and the hour. Then we will create another div to hold the buttons here, okay, the 4 buttons here. Afterward, we will also create another div to manage this content here, okay. So by default it's like this, to manage this content here. Okay, so it is very simple approach. Now we are going to start the coding. Okay, so let's dive in. Alright, so like I explained, I will start with a div and I'll give it a class of container. Inside this div, I will create an h1 tag, and I'll give it a class. I'll give it a class of title. Remember, you're going to use the class to style it, okay? The class and the IDs that you are going to create, that's what you're going to style it. Then I will name it Stopwatch. Okay, so we have this, we have our Stopwatch, okay? Alright, so what we are going to do next is we are going to create another div, okay, to hold these ones, okay, but I'll use a span to hold them, okay, the timer. So let's go ahead and do that. I'll give it a class of Stopwatch. Then inside I'll create another div with a class timer, okay. Okay, so this is where I'm going to put this div, is where I'm going to put this timer here, okay, and I'm going to use span to do that, okay, and I'm going to use an ID, okay, so ID, and I'll say minutes, and I'll duplicate it 2 more times, getting 3 0 0. I'm going to change this one to a second, and I'm going to change this one to a millisecond. Alright, so let's save it and check our project first. Okay, so it's like this, okay. Now we need to create the control. These are the controls, alright, which is the buttons. So let's go ahead and do that. And we need to come out from this division. We are coming out from the timer. We are still in the Stopwatch, okay. We are coming out from the timer to create the controls. Alright, so we say div. Let's create a class, div with a class. Then we say controls, okay. Alright, now inside is where you are going to create our buttons, okay, btn. Now with the buttons, we give it an ID, okay, an ID of, let's call this one start btn, and we call this one start, okay, start btn and start. Alright, so let's duplicate this one. Let's duplicate it 3 more times, checking from the original project, 1 2 3 4. Okay, so now we have start. We are going to do the stop, pause, and reset. Alright, so let's go ahead and do that. Stop, pause, and reset. Now we'll call this one stop btn, then reset btn, okay, something like this. Alright, so before editing, let's check our project, okay. So we can see we have it here. We have the button here, okay. Alright, so the next thing to do is to create this one, the lab, okay. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. And to do that, we have to come out from this division which is the Stopwatch. Let's come out from it like this, and let's create our div. We'll give it a class of laps. Okay, so inside we give it h2. Okay, and inside the h2 too we give it a class of laps title, and the title is lap timer. This is it. Okay, this one, lap timer. This is the title. Okay, now inside we are going to create a list. Okay, ul, and we give it an id of lab list. Okay, all right, so here let's put some dummy text. We say lab 1. Okay, so we'll use JavaScript to work on this place entirely. Okay, so this here we'll not put much here. Okay, all right, so let's indent our code nicely. All right, congratulations. As now we've been able to build our HTML section perfectly. All right, so we are going to dive in and build the CSS section as well. Alright, welcome back. So in this session we are going to add the CSS side, and in so doing I've divided my screen in order to see the browser section and also to see my code. Okay, so whatever I'll be coding now, I would like to see it happening here live. Okay, that's why I've divided my screen. Let's dive in. So now let's begin with the body tag, and let's give it a background. Let's give it a linear gradient, then let's add of 25 degree. Okay, so now let's give it a display, and we say flex, justify content, then we say center. Let's align item to center. Let's give it a main height of 100 ph. Okay, you can see that now it has aligned to the center. So we give it a font family, and it says, so you can see now it is falling in place. You can see compared to this one, and with this one we are still on it. Okay, all right, so let's go ahead and style the container. Okay, this main container. Okay, let's start the container itself. All right, if you look from the HTML, this is the container. It's a class. Okay, and remember class we use dots. Okay, so let's go ahead, we'll do dot container. Let's give it a background color. All right, so before anything, let's switch this to our project. This is our project. Okay, background color. All right, so at this point I can see something is wrong because the background is supposed to change, but it's not taking effect, meaning there is an error in our code. So let's go ahead and fix it. So let's go back to the HTML and check the container. Okay, the spelling is wrong. Okay, save it, and there we go. All right, now let's continue. Let's give it a border radius to get a rounded curve around it. Let's give it 16 pixels. Okay, now let's give it a padding of 20. Let's give it a box shadow so that you can get a shadow around it like this one. You can see there's a shadow around it nicely. Let's do the same here. Okay, so you can see we have a shadow around it nicely. Now let's give it a display of flex. Now let's give it a flex direction, and we say column, and we align the item to center. Good. All right, so let's go ahead and style the title. Okay, this one, the Stopwatch, it's a class, so we give it dot title. Let's give it a font size of 30 pixels, then margin bottom of 1.5 rem. Okay, so you can see that the font has been styled nicely. Let me add something here. Let me make it timer. Okay, so Stopwatch timer, something like this. Nice. Now let's go back to the CSS. Okay, so from here, let's check from the HTML. Now from the title, we have the Stopwatch. So let's go ahead and start the Stopwatch. It's a class, so dot Stopwatch. Now let's give it a display of flex. Let's give it a flex direction to column, and let's align to center. Let's add a gap GBA and let's give it 20%. Sorry, 20 pesos. Okay, GAB 20 pesos. Okay, now you can see it is falling in place. Okay, now let's go ahead and work on the timer. I think timer is on the next on the line. Yes, from the Stopwatch we have the timer. It's a class. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. Let's give it a font size of 40 pixels. Let's give it a background color. Let's give it F. Let's add a padding of 20 pixels. Let's add a border radius 8 pixels. Let's add box shadow. Now we are going to work on this animation. You can see the animation here nicely. We are going to work on it, and you have to use the keyframe pause. So let's dive in. I'll do at keyframe pause. Now I have to specify from. I need from and to, but then let's build a from. So the from, you use transform. Okay, the transform with a scale 1. So we do transform and give it a scale of 1.05 like this. Then let's come here. No, let's give it a scale 1. Okay, scale 1 is okay. Now let's come here and build the 2. Let's give the property 2, and we say transform, give it a scale of 1.05. At this point it is still not showing anything. Why? Because we have to specify the value. Also here, the property, we have to bring the property and the value to the timer. Remember, we are working within the timer too. Okay, so now let's add the animation property here. Animation. Then we say pause 1.5 seconds infinite. Okay, all right, so you can see that immediately I put this code, you can see that it is now animating nicely. Zoom out and zoom in. Okay, so as it stands now, we will get a challenge, because when this property value moves maybe 2 digits or more, it's going to shift this content. Okay, and it's not going to be responsive. So you have to work on the timer. We need to give it an inline block for it to stand by itself, so that we will align it to the center and give it some weight for it to be independent in a way that it will not affect this buttons here. So let's go ahead and do that. So we give it a time, a class of time. We are still calling it a class, but this time let's add a span to it, and let's give it a weight of 110 pesos. Okay, it's falling in place, and let's give it a display of inline block. Good. Now let's add test align. Let's align to center. Good. Now you can see. Okay, it seems we are mixing something. Let's check. There must be a column here. Yeah, it's supposed to be here and here. Good. You can see it's taking effect. Okay, good. Now let's work on the controls here itself and the button itself. So let's start with the control. It's a class. Now let's give it a display of flex, and let's add a gap of 1 rem. No, not semicolon. Let's give it a column like this. Okay, now let's work on the button itself. So button, let's give it a padding. Let's give it a font size 1 rem. Let's give it a background color. Okay, let's give it a color itself, the text color. Let's make it white. Let's give it a border. No, let's remove the border. We say none. Okay, let's remove the border. Let's give it a border radius 8 pixels. Now we want a transition effect when you hover on the button. Okay, do that. So we say transition, and we say background, give it a background color, say 0.3 seconds. and we say ease in. Okay, you say ease in out. Okay, ease in out, something like this. Now let's apply it to the hoover. Okay, so we say bottom and hoover. I'll give it a background color. Let's work on the lab. Let's check on the HTML first. Now we have the lab and the lab title. Let's work on the lab title first. Work on the lab. So we say lab title. Now let's give it a font size of 1.5. And now let's come to the lab itself. Labs. So we give it a width of 100%. Okay, so let's work on the ordered list, which is the UL. So we say list style type. We say none, and give it a padding of 0. Give it a margin of 0. Like I said before, this place we'll be using JavaScript to make it interactive. And give it overflow Y. Yes, let's set it to auto, and let's give it a maximum height of 200 pixels, and let's give it a background color of white. Now let's give it a border radius, give it 8 pixels, box shadow, so 0 12 pixels, RBG. Okay, so as you all know, UL goes with what? LI. So let's work on the LI. Let's give it a padding. Let's give it a padding of 1 rem. Border bottom. Let's give it 1 pixels. Solid. Okay, so the LI will come with a last child. Okay, so let's do that. Last child. Now let's give it a border bottom of none. We don't like any border bottom. Let's work on the span elements. So I will do li span. I said it that for the lab session here, I'm going to use the JavaScript to work on it. So maybe this time you might not understand. Don't worry, you understand as we are progressing. So I'll give it 700. Okay, so as it stands now, you're through with the CSS part. Congratulations, you're able to work on your CSS section. Let me enlarge it so that you see it well. You can see now, comparing to the original one, you can see no difference. Okay, the difference is that the original one is working, you can interact with it, you can see, but the one that we just built, we have not add any functionality to it. We have not searched in the engine, which is the JavaScript, to make it work, but we are seeing the UI, which is the user interface. The CSS section and the HTML section is working perfectly. Alright, so congratulations. Let's meet on the next section and dive in with the JS, which is the JavaScript. Welcome to the JavaScript section of the Stopwatch timer application. We are going to build the JavaScript section. Okay, so let's dive in. Now, this is what we are going to do. We are going to create variable for these 3. First would be for the timer itself, and the next would be for the bottom section here. And we create a variable for the lab. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. So let's begin with this one. So we say const minute label equals document.get elements by ID. And for now, let's say we don't know the ID. Okay, so let's go to the HTML and fetch the ID. So the first ID is the minute. Okay, let's put it in and duplicate it 2 more times. Now let's change this one to seconds label, and we change this also to millisecond label, and we will change the 3. Okay, so let's get inside, grab the second please, and millisecond. Now we are finished creating the variables for the 3. Now let's work on the bottom. Okay, so start bottom, then let's do documents dot get element by ID. And now let's go and grab the ID. We'll start btn. Now let's duplicate the code 3 more times. And let's change it. Let's change the start to stop. And let's change pause. Let's do pause. And let's do reset. So we go to the HTML and grab the code. Alright, so now let's create the variable for the lab list. Okay, so say const lab list. So we'll come here, the lab list is here. Now we're going to create a variable for the stopwatch itself, okay, for the minute and the second and the millisecond, and we also do that for the interval. Okay, so now let me comment. Okay, stopwatch variables. So let's do let minute equals 0. Someone will ask me, why are you using let instead of const? The reason being that for this one the values will be changing at any time. So if I use const, you are going to get an error when the value change. Okay, now I will say let interval. I'll just leave the interval section like that. Now we are going to set the listener. Alright, so now let's create a listener for this 4 variables. Okay, for the start, the pause, and the stop, and the reset. Okay, so that upon clicking on it, the listener will trigger it and it will function. You start with the start button dot add event listener. Now upon click, I will say start timer or something like this. Let me duplicate it 3 more times, and I change this one to stop, pause, reset. I'll change this one to okay. Alright, so we're able to create a variable for all the bottom 2, and we have set a listener also for it. Now it is time to create a function, okay, for all the 4. So let's go ahead and do that. Alright, so we say function. So the first one is start timer. This is the first function. Then let's create the second one. The second one is stop. And the third one is the function, then pause timer. Then the last one, reset. Now we need additional function for the update, okay, to update. Okay, so let's do that. Update timer. Now let me start from the update timer, and I'll say a millisecond. I'll say millisecond plus. What I'm trying to mean is that whenever we update the timer, we want the millisecond to update. Okay, now let's add logic. Okay, let's write logic code. So we say if millisecond equals is 3 equals to, okay, 100, then we want the millisecond value to change to 0. Okay, we have to do the same to the second. So then we say second, we have to update the second, so we say second plus. Okay, the seconds. Now let me write a comment here for you to understand something. Now 1000 millisecond equals 1 second, okay, or 1 second equals, and 1 second equals 1000 millisecond. 1000 millisecond equals, now 1000 millisecond equals 1 second. Okay, so if you are building a real life project, let me add it. 1000 millisecond equals 1 second. If you are building a real life project, or if you are submitting this project as an assignment in a school, okay, then I will advise you change this one to 1000. Okay, yeah, for proper submission. But I want the code to run faster. That is why I am using 100 instead of 1000. Yeah, so the all works same, but if someone is making assessments of your code, he will tell you here is wrong, but let's use that, okay, it'll work perfectly. Now let's write some logic against the second. So we say if second equals 60, then second equals 0. Okay, then we update the minutes. Okay, so we say minutes plus plus. All right, something like this. So if the millisecond read to 100, it is going to update the second. That's why it says second. So it will turn to 0, then it will update the second. Then the second will turn to 1. When it goes again, then turn to 2. So till the time the second 2 will get to 60, then the second 2 will turn to 0, pass on to the minutes. That is what we are trying to say. Okay, it's time logic. Alright, so as at now, we still have to create another function, which is the display timer. Okay, let me create it first. I will explain. So I will say display timer. Okay, and I've called it. Okay, this is a function called. Now I've called this function, so let's go and create it. We are now going to create that function. So we say function display timer. Okay, so before editing, the display function that we have called, that is what is going to work through these ones. Okay, we have already created the variable for these ones. Okay, that is for the minutes, the second, and the microsecond. Okay, so we are going to use this one to showcase it and make it work. Okay, all right, so inside here, let's start with the millisecond label. Then we say test content, and equals millisecond. Then we say second label dot test content equals second. Then we say minutes label dot test content equals minutes. Now the value that we are updating is inside the here, this update timer, but then we still have to work with the start timer function. Alright, so here we can do update timer, then we start with the start button. We will disable it, then we say true. What you are trying to do is that upon clicking on the start button, we don't want it to start itself again. Okay, for instance, if you start a timer and you click on the start button, we don't want it to start it again. So whilst the timer is still reading, we want the button to be turned off. Okay, that is what I'm trying to mean. Okay, anyway, we are not using the object-oriented programming, so let's dive in. So instead of doing that, I will rather come here. So I'll use the interval. Okay, instead of doing that, I'll rather come here and use the interval. Okay, this one. Then so I'll do something like this. Interval equals set update timer. Then I'll say I have set in this update timer. I'll pass it in this argument. Okay, so I will not use this. I will not use this anymore. I'm making it simple. Then I will say start button dot disable equals true. Okay, so something like this. Alright, so now for our code to function and to read our timer in 2 values but not 1, let's write a part time function and let's return the time. Okay, so let's come here. What you do is let's call the function, then we say part time, then we say time, then we return time dot to start sorry, time dot to string, bring a parenthesis, then we pass, it says part time. Now let's pass in the arguments here, says 2 then 0 strings. Okay, let me do like this, 0 string. Okay, so now that we have created this one, we need to use it. Okay, so let's use it here. So millisecond dot test content, pass it here, we say part time, just something like this, and we do the same against this and against a minute. So now, as at now, the start is working and it is passing in value. Whatever is 0, we want it to. Okay, so now the start is working. Okay, let's work on the pause, and we will use the same method that we use for the start. So if possible, we can grab the code, then we can paste it here. Okay, so with the interval, we will say interval equals, for the pause, we will say clear. We will say clear interval. Here we are not updating. Okay, we are not updating, then because you say interval. Okay, then after clicking on the pause, we don't want the pause to, oh sorry, I'm writing it against the stop. Let's grab the code and send it to the pause. We are working on the pause. So clear interval, then I will say interval. Then when we hit on the bottom, the disable, we say false, because for the pause you should be able to pause and also start. After pausing, when you create a start, it should function. Okay, now the reset, for the reset to work, we still have to create another function to manage the minutes and the second and the millisecond inside the reset. Okay, so to do that, let's create a function. Then we say reset timer data. Let's call it reset timer data. Then the minutes, we set it to 0, and the second we set it to 0, then the millisecond we set it to 0. Then we will say display timer, then we call the display timer function, which is this one, so that it will also affect it. Okay, now let's go to the reset function column and let's update it. We will set the clear interval, we will set it to interval. Then the reset data, let's call it the function that we created, call it. Then with the start button, we say disable, start button disable, let's set it to false. Okay, alright, so now we are on the stop. Okay, the stop function, the stop timer function. To work on it, you know, when you start a timer like this and when you stop it, you see it must give a record. Okay, it must give a records, and as many as you do it, you must get the records. Okay, let's go ahead and do that. So to do that, with the stop function, let's clear the interval, let's set it to interval. Then we said add to lab list, let's call this function. So the add to lab list, let's make it like this. Okay, camel casing, add to lab list. Then let's call for, you say reset timer, reset timer data dot disable, let's set it to false. Okay, so we will come down here and we have to create a function. Okay, so now I call the function here and we need to create that function. This function that I called, it's not created yet. Let's create it. Let's create a variable and pass some argument to it, so that the stop function can bring out the values that we've been having inside the list, or the values that we'll be having inside the lap timer. So we say function, then we pass in the function to add to lap list. Then we create the variable, say const lap time equals, we are using the argument string or the semi-string. It is under your escape key. Okay, that's what we are using. Then pass in the dollar sign, dollar, then our parent, our curly braces, then we say part time, parenthesis, minus, alright, so let's create a list item variable. We do list const list item equals document dot create element, and here the argument you pass is the li. Remember, the li is coming from the HTML. Okay, so we have to specify that one too. Even we have to create this one first before we create the li, but for time factor we say list item dot inner HTML. We overrate it to the argument string, the one that is under your escape key again. Then let's call the span, and we say lab, then we need the $sign content, then we pass in the argument plus. Let's close the span. Alright, so as it stands now, we've been able to create our JavaScript session for our project, and it is working. Okay, alright, so if we have to refresh and start a timer, now you can see let's make it big so that we can demonstrate it well. So we can pause it and we can stop it. Immediately we stop it, it gives us an update. So we can start again, we can pause, we can reset, we can start again, you can stop, and it gives us an update. Okay, as expected, and you can see it's responsive too. Okay, it's responsive. All the updates also will be keeping here. Alright, congratulations for being able to follow till this point. It is not easy because I introduced a lot of new concepts intentionally. Some things I did not explain. I'm expecting you to learn more. Okay, so anything that you don't understand, you can hit me up on the comment section. Facing any challenge that you think it is higher, hit me up. Even if I have to give you the source code, I'll give you the source code for you to practice them more. Alright, I also urge you, please do subscribe to the channel so that we can go together. Okay, alright, so that's my motivation. If I see more people subscribing, I will also come with a richer content for you guys to learn and also to enjoy. God bless you, take care, and have fun.